You. Very good. Welcome everyone. Welcome. Thanks, Brennan. Welcome to the special meeting of 7th of July 2021. The meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank all of those of you in the room today and acknowledge everyone who's watching via Council social media channels. I'd like to open the meeting by acknowledging the Mayor, Portfolio Leader Councillor Carl, the CEO, Brian Pidgeon, General Manager Stuart Summers, and any staff in the room. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose song lines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guybil and Jarrawa peoples, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the traditions, the rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. So item number 2 is attendance, apologies and leave of absence. I don't think we have any apologies and no leave of absence. No one seeking leave. No, I don't need to move for that. So can I have someone move that we suspend?
Madam Chair, just Councillor Carl has...
I beg your pardon, Councillor Carl.
Yeah, next Tuesday's committee meeting, can I request a leave of absence for a part of that meeting?
Do that now.
Because this is a statutory form, yeah?
Okay, yeah.
I'd like to request a leave of absence from, let me say 1:30, just in case the meeting goes longer. Personal reasons, family member to receive treatment.
So that is the 13th?
Yes.
From 1:30?
That's next Tuesday's committee meeting. Yep.
Yes, thank you. Can I have someone move? Thank Councillor Shine, seconded Councillor McDonald. All those in favour? Thank you.
Madam Chair,
yes,
I won't be able to attend next Tuesday's committee meetings either. Could I seek leave of absence, please?
Yes.
There's a meeting, as I've already mentioned, in Brisbane in respect to the rail link, the passenger rail link.
Okay. I'll have someone move that. Councillor McMahon, someone seconded. Councillor Melissa Taylor. All those in favour? It's carried.
Thank you.
No one else? We can have someone move that we suspend standing orders. Please, Councillor McDonald and Councillor O'Shea. All those in favour? It's carried. Okay, so we only have one item. That's item number 4, and it's material change of use impact short-term accommodation located at 3 Boot Street, Carney Springs. And Shakita is going to take us through that. Thank you, Shakita.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, councillors, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello.
Wendy, please, can we bring attachment 2, figure 1, please? Thank you. This report outlines a development application for short-term accommodation. The aerial view shows the subject site that is located south of Carney Spring and surrounded predominantly by detached dwelling houses. Oh, sorry.
Just push it, press it, direct it over here, Shakita, to the, I think. Maybe, maybe not.
Sorry.
Just a bit ridiculous, isn't it?
Technology.
So it's surrounded predominantly by detached dwelling houses. It adjoins dwelling houses on east and north and dual occupancy to west.
Okay.
Can we go to the next? Oh, okay, thank you. The subject site is located in a low-density residential zone, and has an area of 540 square meters, has access to Boot Street, which is dual lane sealed road, and connected to all urban infrastructure. The subject site contains a dwelling house, a bedroom dwelling house with a total gross floor area of 200 square meters. Can we please go to the next figure? The proposed development will reuse the existing 4-bedroom dwelling house to provide tourist accommodation at a scale similar to dwelling house use. The existing dwelling house will be retained in its current form, and the proposed short-term accommodation will be separated from adjoining properties to the east and north and west by a 1.8 meter high timber purlin fence. The existing landscaping at the front of the dwelling house will be retained, and the existing fences will be retained as well. The proposed use will be serviced by the existing vehicle crossover and a driveway, and will have four car parking spaces in total on site, 2 spaces in the garage, and 2 spaces in front of the garage on the driveway. While the proposed short accommodation doesn't have an access to distributor road, can we please go back to aerial view? To the first figure, please. It is located 170 meters from the Nelson Road, which is Nelson Street, which is a subarterial road. The development application requires impact assessment and has undergone public notification. 2 properly made submissions were received opposing the development. The main issues raised in submissions were related to increased number of cars parked on the street in front of the subject site and noise impacts. It is considered that the proposed development provides on-site car parking in accordance with Transport Access and Parking Code, and that conditions can be imposed to manage noise impacts, including requirement to follow a noise compliance management procedure. It is recommended to impose a condition that the property is only let to a maximum of 8 persons at any one time. Overall, the proposed development is considered to generally comply with the relevant assessment benchmarks of the Toowoomba Regional Planning Scheme, and where applicable, the development can be conditioned to comply with the relevant assessment benchmarks. Accordingly, it is recommended to approve the proposed development subject to reasonable and relevant conditions. This recommendation is consistent with relevant provisions of the Planning Act 2016. There are no impacts to human rights associated with Council's consideration on this report or a decision in relation to it.
Thank you, Shakita. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Shakita. I see here on page 38, it's recommended 8 persons, but only 1 associated group or entity with a maximum of 8. How will we know that? How would we know whether it was more than 1 entity or 2 families?
Well, actually, the condition itself states that we have a proposed condition 1.3, which states the premises must not accommodate more than 8 persons at a time. It considered that the dwelling house will be let to 1 group or entity at the one time, usually.
But my question really is, how can we ensure that that's the case? We can't really, can we?
We can't, no.
No, so it probably is superfluous to have the one and just have the maximum of 8, because you're relying on people to do the right thing, and some will and some won't.
That's right, yeah, this is why,
So-
the condition states the premises must not accommodate more than 8 persons at
Okay,
a time.
thank you.
Yes.
General Manager, make a comment. Thank you.
There's a number of conditions that often come up with that problem of actually policing from the outside or enforcing it. But it's important to have them on the approval so that if there is a complaint or a reason to check it out, we
Okay.
have that head of power.
Okay.
So
Thank you,
it does
thank you.
need to be there.
Thank you, Stuart.
Councillor McMahon?
Thanks, Chair. Couple of questions. Shakita, I disagree that this premises has 4 car parks. I think if you put it on realestate.com and said this is a house for sale with 4 car parks, it'd be factually incorrect. It has 2 car parks in the garage and a driveway. I think if you're parking cars in, doesn't make it a car park, just my opinion. I just wanted to ask about, what is short-term accommodation? Is it Airbnb? Is it tourist accommodation, as you said? Is it letting your mates stay and charging them $10 a night? Do all of those fit into this? Or I couldn't find anything in the report that clarified exactly what we're meaning by short-term accommodation. Could you clarify, please?
Well, under the planning scheme, we do have the definition for short-term accommodation. I can't recall exactly wording in the planning scheme. However, it does include Airbnb.
So while it does include that, it's I mean, is there some way we could find out? Because I assume it's much broader, that if you 8 persons, well, I suppose where I'm going, this is your standard 500 square metre block in suburbia, mum and dad, 2 kids and a dog, if you're lucky, and 8 persons means each one of those 4 bedrooms have 2 people in them. And
Yes,
I think
but-
that's
sorry.
a fair few people for this kind of house. So I'm wondering, like, if I'm the owner and I rent out the other 3 rooms, this fits within our description of short-term accommodation that we've got in the application. Is that correct?
Well, they're letting the whole house. It's a 4-bedroom house, and it assumed that each bedroom would accommodate 2 persons.
Yeah.
And it can be a family of 2 parents with, for example, 6 children. Equivalent
Yeah,
to
sure. Yeah,
a
8
family
persons, I'm
of
aware
8
of.
persons, yes. And according to Transport Access and Parking Code, the requirement for short-term accommodation is to have 1 car parking space per unit, for example. And we accept the dwelling house to be 1 unit.
Okay. No, thank you for that. My last question, in general, I'm unfamiliar with what a noise complaints management procedure is. Could you explain to me how that works in relation to this?
Just a second. Can you please bring up that acoustic management procedure that I gave you? Yes. So that procedure includes details for contact person that will investigate any noise complaints, investigate and take any measures, and discuss the measures that were undertaken to mitigate those noise impacts. There is a procedure for a noise complainant to follow. So when they try to contact the person, they will have to provide the date and time of the noise event, provide the contact details and why they think that the noise, they think that the noise was unreasonable and or intrusive.
Okay. Thanks, I appreciate that. Last question, Chair, sorry to ask so many. I'm just wondering, applications for this style of living, I would assume, come to council regularly, and this one being contentious enough also that it comes to us. Can you just help me out here? What's made this one different that it's come to us as opposed to the many of these I would assume council gets?
Yes, previously we approved almost all applications for short-term accommodation that utilize the existing dwelling houses. This one is located, the subject site is located in low-density residential zone and triggers impact assessment. And we received 2 submissions opposing the development.
Thank you for
This is why it came to council.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Clear there? Thanks. Councillor Carl and then Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Chair. You could be faced with a scenario where there could be 4 different couples that have no relation to each other at all stay in the premises, couldn't there be?
Yes, it can happen. Yes, definitely. And unfortunately, we can't prevent anyone actually parking in front of this subject site because we don't have no parking sign there. Anyone can park, even not related to the activity going on the site.
Yeah.
Just for
given,
clarification, Councillor Carl, are you saying that the group don't have any relationship, that they've rented the house as a...
It could be 4
different couples.
separate groups.
No, they've said that in the, will not be rented out to different groups.
We can't force
But how would you...
Can't.
It could in fact be rented out to 4 different couples that have no relationship, and how would we even...
It is also,
How would we even know that?
that's right, but it also can be let out for long term to 4 different groups. And
But
they
we're-
would
but
be
we're
similar, the impacts will be similar to a dwelling house. So no matter how many people they will be let to the maximum of 8 as we recommended in a report.
However, it's come to council under short-term accommodation, and given the broad definition of short-term, do we know what the principal use of this place will be under that definition?
It will be a short-term accommodation that will be let to people, a group of maximum of 8 people for short-term, a maximum of a week probably.
I ask myself, and this is me, I'm a person that's looking for a B&B. Would I look for a B&B in the middle of suburbia to stay in? For me, that wouldn't be an option. If I'm looking for a B&B, I'd want a bit of amenity, I reckon, other than suburbia and a normal residential house. I'm trying to work out in my mind whether this is an Airbnb or whether in fact will be used for other purposes where it could be turned into long-term stay, or in fact it could be used as a rental property for other uses, given the area and proximity to the university as well.
Well, in the current application is for short-term accommodation. This is what we are assessing it
Isn't it? It's a broad definition.
at against. And the definition for short-term accommodation, according to our planning scheme, means the use of premises for providing accommodation of less than 3 consecutive months to tourists or travelers, managers' residence, office, or recreation facilities for the exclusive use of guests, if the use is ancillary to the use in subparagraph 1, but does not include a hotel, nature-based tourism, resort complex, or tourist park.
May I just add to that, Madam Chair? It's really close to Gabonbar, so to me that would be a reasonable use for an Airbnb near Gabonbar Homestead.
On the other side of, it's on the other side of the highway.
Well, it's not that far away though. It's
Okay.
a 5-minute
There
cab.
Look, I'm not sure the nature of your question,
There
Councillor
won't.
Carl,
I'm
to
just
the
trying
officer.
to work out in my mind what it'll actually, how broad the use will be of this premises. I just consider it from the point of view of, you look at that aerial shot, if I was the neighbour beside that house, what would it actually be used for under that broad definition? I'd suggest not for the forum today, Mr GM, but we revisit short-term accommodation in the planning scheme review too.
Okay. Councillor Von Hoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to go back to an issue that was first raised by Councillor McMahon, and that is in regards to the car parking. And on page 17 of 38 of board books, one of the issues raised in one of the properly made submissions is that a submitter expressed concern that cars associated with the proposed use and parked on street may reduce safety as the street is narrow. And the comment provided by council is the proposed development is provided with the 4 on-site car parking spaces that would be sufficient to service up to 8 people. And Councillor McMahon's right, on realestate.com it states 2 car parks, and then you have a look at the photos. I can't see how you get to 4. At a push, maybe 3. So first of all, I'd like some clarity about how we got to 4. That's question 1. And question 2 is, what, if it's not 4, what is the number that is sufficient to service the 8 people? Or is 4 the minimum number of car parks?
So for 3 or more bedroom dwelling houses, we have a requirement to provide 2 double garage, 2 parking spaces
So it is
within the on-site. It's for 3 or more bedroom house. So for short-term accommodation, under the Transport Access and Parking Code, we have parking rate requirement for 1 unit over short-term accommodation. They will have to provide 1 car parking space. And we accept that the dwelling house is 1 unit. So under our Transport Access and Parking Code, they actually meet that requirement.
Okay, so if you'll indulge me just for clarity, Madam Chair, so you're saying for this to meet code, it actually only needs 1 car space?
Car space, yes, because we accept a dwelling house to be 1 unit.
So my concern that 4 isn't actually the reality is it doesn't matter because it still meets code.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Can you tell me how we got to 4 nonetheless?
Well, they provided us with information that there is a double car garage, and also
It fits inside
just
the
can we
property
please have a floor plan? Sorry,
I've got it here.
site plan.
How longer than 6 metres?
2 on the
It's figure 3, I think.
garage.
There's room. Yeah, there is room for 4.
So there is room in front of the
Inside
double
the property boundary.
yes, inside the property
I
boundary.
mean, it's immaterial if code
Order.
is 1.
Just have one person speaking at a time if we can, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, the applicant provided the information that 2 car parks can be parked in the double garage and 2 in front of the double garage. So that's, this isn't, the information is based on that.
Okay, thank you.
Answer your question, Councillor Von
does,
Hoff? Yeah,
thank you.
Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 2, but the first one I just want to clarify on, because we're going backwards and forwards on this, 2 different couples or 8 separate people, all that sort of stuff. The way I'm reading this is that we've got this cap on 8 people. So if I, individual, book it out under my name, I can then have 7 mates there. It's not like, and if I choose to go and have 7 other randoms there, that's my issue. Like, we're not saying that maximum of 8, meaning you can have 2 separate over here and then someone else books 2 over there. Is that right? Is that what this condition stipulates? So it's a maximum of 8 under a single booking. So a single person chooses, is that
That's
correct?
right, yes. Maximum of 8 under a single one booking for one period.
So you really wouldn't have, to use that example before, 4 random couples staying there, to be honest?
Wouldn't matter.
Wouldn't. It's superfluous.
Still could have. No way.
Danielle?
Councillors, generally the intent is they're not advertising them to rent them as individual rooms. Like,
Yeah.
I can ring up and say, I just want to
That's
rent
right.
1 bedroom, and you ring up and say, I want to rent this
Correct.
different bedroom, and 4 different totally random people rent it.
That's right.
Often they're rented, whether it's like, I think one of the councillors used the example of it being proximate to Gabon Bar. We have, I think Gabon Bar actually owns a couple of properties that they use for the specific purpose that, for example, if I was the bride with my bridesmaids and maybe my mum, we could rent the house. There'd be 8 of us, and we'd do our prep for the wedding. Sometimes people come to visit, relatives in the hospital if they're from out of town, and they want something more than a motel unit, so they will rent one of these houses and bring the family in so that they can, spend time with a family member that's in, in hospital. My family member somewhere in Toowoomba might be having a party, and my relatives from Brisbane want to come up, and rather than rent 4 motel units, they might say, well, it's much cheaper for us to rent this house and stay there for the function or wedding or whatever they're coming up for. So really it's that, if you were to contact me as the owner of the house, I could rent it to you and, your 7 mates, or you and your 6 family members. It's one group, so it's not totally random, non-connected people.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that. And my second question is, as it stands right now, as just residential property, what restrictions lie on it right now?
None. Technically, you could sign a lease on the property and potentially have your 8, 10 mates living with you. We've heard stories, particularly I've heard in Brisbane, I don't know whether Toowoomba's the case, where you'll see, particularly in, for some reason, Sunnybank, people will have houses and they will carve them up for student accommodation, and you'll have 15 people or 15 students in the one house. That's not Airbnb, that's longer term rentals, but they will rent rooms individually. This certainly is not that situation. Very different.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Nancy Summerfield.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, just keeping this simple, I'll use an example of my next door neighbours. I hope they're not watching, but I won't name names. There are young people living next door to me, beautiful young people, and I don't know that all 4 of them are ever the same people. They, one falls in love and moves on, another one gets transferred and moves on, and I have these beautiful people living next door, and I never know how many are there, but there's always cars, not only from them, but cars all over the street from various people in my street. And they have 2 car parks in their house. I have 4. I have 2 undercover in a garage plus 2 in the driveway, which is what this is, because if anyone's got a car longer than 6 metres, then they probably need to call it a truck. There is room for 4 vehicles in that yard. And I think we're overcomplicating something quite simple here. I think there is opportunity to just move forward with this. It's one group only, as has been clearly identified through the discussions previously, and it's quite a simple thing, and I just don't see the issues with it at all.
Thanks, Councillor Summerfield. Councillor Carol Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to make the point that getting the photograph up on realestate.com or Domain, that 4 cars can fit in there inside the front boundary. So 2 inside the garage, 2 outside, and still be inside the property boundary.
Okay.
So that's all. That was the only point I was going to make.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer Taylor?
No.
Okay.
Done. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor McDonald?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to Shakita, perhaps. Just in regard to this, if you go to figure 3, which shows the land use, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if this was in the low, medium density residential, it would be code accessible.
That's correct, yes.
Which would mean that it wouldn't have public notification.
That's
wouldn't
correct.
impact, and it'd be not dissimilar to the some 294 Airbnbs that are listed on Airbnb currently in our Toowoomba city area.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, I would suggest that keeping to the definitions of what it is, I don't disagree with Councillor Carl that perhaps through the planning process we need to have a little bit more of a say on where it is. But there is no greater risk to a person living next to, beside, than to a residential property. And the resident either side has the same level of opportunity to have complaints against noise or nuisance as any other, as they should, as any other person to the authorities. For us to regulate the numbers of people in there and how they function and operate is almost dreamland, to be honest. It would be regulated by the people who actually own the Airbnb and who actually rent it out to those particular people as to what it is. Unless there's a lot of ruckus and noise, we won't know how many people are in there. And we have far more other pressing issues as a regulatory authority to be concerned about when something like that goes on. So happy with the fact that it's 8 because, you know, comfortably that'd be it. But to be regulating how we do that is almost farcical, to be honest, and that's where I'm comfortable to have a look at how we look at this as a planning scheme. But this is only one block away from not even coming to council. It's less than a 20-metre walk. And yet all those others who have had code accessible applications, gone through the process, we could have the same conversation about every single one of those if we went through it. So it's a disruptive industry. It does what it does. It increases the accommodation for people to come here to stay, if it's 3 months, whatever it might be. And look, I tend to agree with Councillor Summerfield. We can overcomplicate things very easily because of lines on maps. And I think in this case, we are where we are, and I'm comfortable with the report.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor McDonald. Could I ask a couple of questions, Shakita? One, because of having to go through this process, are there any further restrictions put on them in terms of things like fire escapes and anything like that?
No, because it's not in bushfire hazard overlay, we don't have this kind of restrictions on this development.
Okay. The building regulations.
Building regulations.
My other question was, what happens when, say, this house is sold and or these people don't want to operate it as an Airbnb? Are they then restricted, theoretically, to having 8 people in their house?
They are not restricted. It will go back to a dwelling house use if they would like to use it as a dwelling house.
Do they have to nominate or say?
No, they don't
the
have,
use has
because
changed?
they don't have to nominate or say anything, because dwelling house use is accepted development in a low density residential, and it's already existing dwelling, so there are no requirements for them to notify council about this.
It's sort of farcical, really, isn't it, in a way? Yeah.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just ask for that to be checked, because I think if somebody wanted to go back there and just live there as a family home, I would think that I would want to extinguish that use. So, what actually is available to use? I suppose that's not the reason to ask, because we're being asked to approve something here. But I would just like to have reassurance that if family came at some stage in 12 months or whatever, that they'd be able to extinguish the short-term accommodation use.
There is a process for this. They can cancel the approval. They can ask council to cancel the approval for short-term accommodation and continue using this dwelling house as a dwelling house.
Yeah.
There's no legal requirements to do that.
No, there is no legal requirement.
So, can I ask a question? Is there any kind of a payment or registration that you have to continue to pay or take out to continue this use?
not according.
Is there any type of, if you've got a business or whatever, you have to continue the registration of and other things, the registration. Is there any registration or annual payment or something that has to be made to retain the registration or the actual use of this as a short-term accommodation?
I think that's certain. Well, there are various booking agencies that Airbnb
sorry, Stuart.
register with, but as far as I know,
I'm just meaning
the
with
state
council.
government.
Just with the local government?
No, there's not. No, and just to clarify, the detached dwelling home is the as of right use there, so they can resume the as of right use any time. And over time, there used to be, under the old Act, a use that ceased after 6 months would disappear. That's not the case anymore, but there is an effluxion of time clause, but it's not as dry and cut as it used to be. So if it ceases to be used for some considerable time, it's often difficult to kick-start it again without going through the approvals. However, there certainly is no legal requirement for someone to hand back their approval for a what's it called?
Well, bearing in mind that the planning, it stays with the land, not with the owner.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But that's right.
Okay. If there's no further questions, we had 2 properly made submissions, and we have one of the submitters here, Sian ONeill. Sian, would you like to come up? Sian, your only requirements are to speak into the microphone if you can, and you've got about 5 minutes, and then the councillors might ask you some questions.
Okay, no worries. Hi, council members. I'm going to try not to sound too nervous. I've never actually been to something like this before, but my name is Sian ONeill. I am one of the very lucky neighbours that gets to be next to this home. So I live in 5 Boot Street, so I'm right next door to it. Now, as much as I appreciate all your comments on this matter, I just would like you to take some consideration for a minute and consider what it would be like to actually be myself, my husband and our 2 small children living in this house. And council member, as I appreciate what you said about your home and living next door to lots of people, I don't know if you have small children or not, but I have one who has just started in prep and one who's in year 2. And my daughter who's in year 2 actually has a diagnosed anxiety disorder. And I had not only about a month or so ago, there was a bunch of men working men with all their utes parked at the front of 3 Boots at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, sitting in the entertainment area of 3 Boots, lights on and everything, yahooing, partying, swearing, yelling out to each other, carrying on while I was trying to put my children to sleep. But that's just one of the matters, and that's just one of the ones that's happened. I guess there's lots of things where I can put my feelings and my emotions into this one and say how it's really difficult to live next to. And I'm sure, as a lot of the other houses that have had to live next to all the other houses that get approved for Airbnbs and things like that in Toowoomba, they've probably got the same thing to say as well. But when I looked through this document for today, there was a few things that caught my eye that I thought were a little bit interesting. And there was something in there that I thought, if this does get approved and gets passed through, there was a word that came up that says, oh, it generally complies and it generally consists. And I don't know how something can go through that just generally complies and generally consists. And I'm talking about, there's a section where it refers to your code P03. And again, I'm just an amateur here. I'm not a council member. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm just going off your documents. And there's something there that says about P03. And it says about being near a sub-arterial road. I know you mentioned that it's only 170 metres from Nelson Street. but it's not direct access to a subarterial road. It's not. Yes, it's 170 metres from it, but it's not. There was another part that said that it is adjoining or located on the opposite side of a road or existing short-term accommodation or other accommodation activities or similar scale. It's not. It's the only house in that street, on Boot Street, that is being used as short-term accommodation. Every other house is just like mine. It's just a family-owned, occupied. There's no other house around there that is like a holiday home. All car parking needs met, and now I know you have all gone back and forth on this, but I have some really lovely photos here to show you. But I mean, it was in my submission and you don't have to have a look at it, but here is the front of my house where I have cars parked all the front of it. There's cars all on the street, on the grass of 3 Boot Street. And yes, you're right in saying that this house could be used for a Gabon bar wedding. It could be used for really important things, like a funeral, which is only a few metres away, which this was used. This time, this incident happened. The family were using the home for a funeral, but then decided to invite every single person, not every single person, but quite a few people, back to the home after the funeral. And I can tell you that the noise that was coming from the home and the chaos that was in front of a very small, narrow street, that is Boot Street, was full on. It could have sounded like the ceremony was inside my house. So that's just one incident. I have lots of other times when there's people staying that park all along the street, and I know you said that they can fit 4 cars in, but generally, sometimes they're lucky if it's 3. They'll put 1 on the driveway, 2 in the garage, and then all the rest will park along the street. And when I'm trying to get out of my driveway and there's cars going back and forth on Boot Street, I've got a house getting built on the other side of me, it's a nightmare because, as you can see, Boot Street's got a bend on it. So when people come around Boot Street and there's parking all along it, it's really, really, really dangerous. So I'm just asking for you to consider how you would go living next to something like this, how you would like it. People coming and going constantly, constant different people. Noise constantly, but I know, okay, that's what happens in suburbia. Yes, I appreciate that. But it's uneasy, it's dangerous, but bottom line, it generally complies. You're going to approve something that generally complies? I'm not sure.
Well done, Sian.
Thank you.
Your 5 minutes. Stay there. We might have some questions. So, yes. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. So the property is already operating as a short-term accommodation?
It's been operating since before December, or around December of last year.
And so you were already experiencing the impacts?
Yeah, so we've been struggling with it for a very long time. So as you could appreciate, my frustration was already quite high. And then when we saw the sign up for Have Your Say, obviously I jumped on it. Like I said, I've never been to something like this. I'm not normally one. I normally keep my opinions to myself. But as it had been operating for a while already, yeah, I had to say something.
Thank you.
Councillor McMahon.
Yeah, thanks. Just the car parking that, you know, they're saying it'll be 4 in the driveway. You're saying it's all over the street. Can you just sort of maybe regular basis, how often, how many cars that you see? Is it every night, or is it on weekends, or once a month? How often do you get the cars on the street?
Yeah, so if it's just a family that's staying in the house, so sometimes we have had just like the husband, wife and small children or whatever, fair enough, we'll have maybe 2 cars max or something like that. But generally, we have had this house used more often than not. It's been a company house that it gets used. So where you were talking about that one unity thing, we've found more often than not there'll be a company that rents this house, and then we'll have like 3 or 4 fellas with all of them having a different work ute, and they'll park it all along the front, along the grass or whatever, and obviously they don't want to block themselves in or whatnot, and they'll park even up on the grass, and then there'll be other people that will park along the curb, and I would say 90% of the time that this house gets rented out, there is cars all along the street.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sian? Councillor O'Shea and then Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Sian. Thanks for your presentation. Have you ever have you lodged down noise or the parking with council in the past?
Yeah, so I did speak to I can't remember his name, but it was someone from council, and about the road situation in the cars, and he passed me on to someone else from council about it, because originally this was before all this was happening, and he made a suggestion about a solid line or something like that could be put on Boot Street so that they couldn't park on the road. But then I spoke to someone else from council, and they told me that because the road was wide enough or something, and if they were parking legally, and cars could go either side, which is very touch and go when someone is parked on the side of the road, then it was okay, and that council didn't need to put a line down or anything like that.
Okay.
So that was the result that I got.
Okay, and do you, seeing if this is approved, the conditions are now in place on around the numbers and things like that, does that give you any further, dare I say, like comfort knowing that there's certain conditions that need to be complied to with this now that are there in writing that are clear?
No, because see, the worry for me is that, like you say, 8 people can stay in the house. So if we go back to that whole 8 people, 1 unity, if we go to it being a company, so say an energy company rents it out and they rent it out to 8 different fellas, and they all come with 8 different work utes, you've got 8 cars at the front. So where do you park 8 cars? If it's only 3 cars or 4 cars, where do you park them?
Yeah, no, I understand your point. And my final question for that might be one for Stuart Summers or someone maybe to... It's a really good question around that generally complies, to be honest. Like if you don't, and that's probably one of the first things I used to grapple with when first on council, but maybe an explanation around that, because I think it's a really good point around that terminology. Might be helpful.
Are we going to have a comment in the middle of Sian's?
Sorry.
You'll recall not too long ago, councillors, we did have a session where we talked about the assessment process and what was the distinction between code and impact assessment. And if you have an impact assessable application, it does not have to meet the performance outcomes to potentially be approved. So you can have something that generally complies with the PO, and in this instance, there's an issue in terms of the class of road that it fronted. So it does not have to tick every aspect of a performance outcome in order to potentially be approved. You can take into account whatever other relevant matters you consider are necessary, and you can approve an application that does not comply to the letter of the law. And that's why in this case, because it doesn't comply to the letter of the law, it's been expressed as generally complies, because it doesn't comply with that road hierarchy requirement. However, on balance, on the assessment, the assessing officer has considered that it's appropriate to recommend approval.
Councillor McDonald, then Councillor Carroll-Taylor.
Thanks. Through you, Madam Chair. Sian, thank you very much for coming along today. It takes courage to do what you've done, so
thank you.
We appreciate it. It means that the process is working when you come out. I just wanted to, just on the map up there that you see on the screen, so there's a number of vacant lots. There's one opposite and there's one just down. So yours is to the right of it?
Yeah, so there's actually a house on that block of land now, the one right next to us. Yeah.
I thought there was. So you would get quite a bit of traffic still run through there, I would imagine, on any given day.
Absolutely.
So, and it depends who's in there, obviously, in the place as far as disturbance goes. But have you lodged a complaint with police in regard to the noise outside of 10 p.m?
Yeah, no. So I'll be completely honest what I did. So when that night when I was putting my children to bed and I was in their bedroom and the noise was as if they were in my children's room and my daughter was crying and they were freaking out. I was just really angry by this point, and it was actually during the process of all this. So I I'd spoken to council, I'd done all the application, and council had actually said to me that I was allowed to know the contact number and name of the owner of the home. I was legally allowed to know that. So I contacted the owner and I just said, look, I'm really sorry to contact you. And it was the first time I said, I'm really sorry to contact you, but I'm trying to put my children to sleep right now and you've got people in the home that are swearing, slamming doors, carrying on, and I just can't get my children to sleep. They're crying, carrying on. Can you please do something about it? And fair dues, the next morning, she had the property manager ring me, contact me. She told me that the company, so that it was a company situation where the fellas were staying there for work. She contacted the company owner and they were given a warning. And that night, they did quieten down. They weren't as rowdy or anything like that. And that's what I did. So I didn't contact the police. I just went straight to the owner because I thought I'd give her a chance, and that's what I did. So, yeah.
Well, that's positive then, if that's the case. So,
yeah.
And that what you've done there is available to any resident.
Yeah.
You know, whether there's an Airbnb or a motel or whatever's next to them, that's available. So I'm pleased you went down that path, and now you have that contact with the owner. I'm hopeful with the added conditions that are placed on this, which are, you know, by and large more than what they would be in a code accessible application, that really should give you comfort. Seriously, it should give you comfort if it does go through, because you now have that knowledge that there are conditions on it that will give you some leverage, and hopefully the owner of that property will be made aware of this as well, and will know those conditions certainly after this. So thanks very much for coming in.
That's all right.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, if I could have somebody comment to me on how the one entity fits with a company with individual people. Have we got that covered there in that requirement? Because I don't think, look, I'll be very honest, there was a short-term accommodation up in one of the older areas of Toowoomba where an elderly person was severely compromised by all this, and it's okay to say you can contact the person, but you know, if the person isn't conducive to that and doesn't take an active role in trying to, these people were living here before this has come. If there's a motel or something else, or even units, so then you're guided by where you buy a house or something, should you not want to be beside any of those things. But when you're already there in an area where it's not really supposed to be, ideally, then you really don't have too much say. So is what we have there, if it's a company, we're more envisaging a family, one entity. So does one entity fit a company? I'd like Stuart or Danielle to comment on that, please.
I'll have first chop, and if Danielle disagrees with me, she can have a go. But basically, yes, it would comply with the conditions
so then
we've
it's
got
useless.
now, because it is the one entity. I'm not sure to what degree of regulation you'd need to go to try and prevent that from happening, because with a family, with a funeral situation or a wedding or what have you, you're going to get one person organising it, the mum-in-law or whatever, and you would have maybe cousins, nephews and aunts staying in there. That's right, but up to the number of 8. Yeah. And yes, I think a number of the Airbnbs are used by companies around the place. I have one opposite me in Getty Street. That's different workers come and go. Thankfully, it's a 2-chain road, and they're 40 metres away. So it doesn't concern me greatly from that viewpoint. But yes, I think it would certainly comply with the entity issue. Just one entity, as per the conditions there.
If I could have a follow-up, I don't believe that any of us are given any comfort by that, and I think
No,
that
well,
by saying that there's 8 people,
wasn't
one
trying
entity,
to-
I think
yes,
all our minds were going to a family or a family group, and not to 8 individual adult employees, which would do this. And I mean, let's be honest with you, if you've got 3 different people through the week, 3 different lots of people, and you've got to take it upon yourself to ring the owner of that premise 3 times a week, that's not something that I would be wanting to do. And I think that's what we should all put ourselves in, the role of somebody who's putting up with these impacts.
Yep, I understand that. And we are faced in this community, as with many that have large university campuses, where there are lots of houses with students, a different student, unrelated, in each bedroom. And that also causes the odd grief from time to time, and a lot of those houses are not too far from Nelson Street.
I'm aware of that.
And as I think Councillor McDonald said before, it's another of those disruptive industries, such as the taxi companies are suffering and what have you, that's proving very difficult to regulate to the same degree that we could regulate motels, for example. Motels are licensed and regulated by the state government, the councils and everyone else. Airbnbs are very lightly regulated at this stage. It is the topic that comes up around election time every 4 years for state governments in terms of regulating Airbnb and other of those industries. But to this point in time, they haven't done a lot.
That's right. Councillor Von Hoff. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Thank you, Sian. I'm going to ask, can you please repeat yourself for my benefit? You were talking about the road safety and that you'd reported it and you'd gone through it and that there'd been a discussion about the yellow line. And then what happened, sorry?
Yeah, so I can't remember his name, I'm really sorry, but the council member that I spoke to was explaining to me that the distance of the road, because I was trying to explain that Boot Street to me seems very narrow, and even when there's no one really parked on the side of the road trying to get back and forth, you've got to be quite cautious. And he explained to me that it is a normal size road, and he said, and if they're parking legally on the road, so not up on a curb or anything like that, he said there's actually no reason to have a yellow down the side, and that people can park, go past easily, and that there was no reason he couldn't see a reason for it to be adjusted or changed or whatever. So.
Okay. All right.
So that's kind of where the phone call stopped.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions for Sian. Sian, you've done a sterling job, really.
Thanks.
You really have, and I admire you for coming in and stating your case. The vagaries of the planning system and acceptable outcomes, possible outcomes, it is a science. It doesn't seem like there's a science, but there is. And part of this discussion is how much regulation do you put on people? We're always in trouble for red tape. But, I mean, that is a part of that sort of discussion. But we can explain it to you someday, or Stuart might be able to anyway. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good on you, Sian.
Thanks, Sian.
Okay, so with that, can I have someone move that we reinstate standing orders? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Shine, all those in favour? That's it. Okay, so the recommendation is there before you that Council approve the application MCU 2021-753 for a development permit for a material change of use impact short-term accommodation pursuant to the provisions. Sorry,
Madam
Councillor
Chair.
Von Hoff, yeah.
I'm sorry. Is there an opportunity for one last question?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, my apologies. When Sian was speaking, and she was talking about how this actually has been operating since the end of last year for the intent of what this material change of use would be for. So presumably they haven't gone through the correct channels to date. Is that something that is taken into consideration by council, the fact that they were non-compliant for a certain number of months?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Do it and ask forgiveness.
Well, we're mid-recommendation. Councillor McMahon, did you have a...
Thanks, Chair. I'm actually wondering if I might be able to move an alternate recommendation, same words, but that council does not approve, and same wording from there on.
Well, I think you're flagging an alternative recommendation, a refusal.
Yeah, so I'm
if this didn't
unfamiliar
come
on
up.
process on that. Do I just vote against this one, or can I actually move one that says does not approve?
If you vote against this one and it goes through by majority, this is the motion.
So can I move the motion?
You're
Councillor does
flagging that you're going to move an alternative recommendation. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, so I won't start again, but we're up to short-term accommodation pursuant to the provisions of Section 60 of the Planning Act 2016 and subject to the conditions listed below. Do I have someone move that recommendation?
Happy to move, Madam
Councillor
Chair.
McDonald. Seconder, Councillor Summerfield. All those in favour?
I'd like to debate it, thank you.
Oh, beg your pardon, Councillor Carl. Moving to debate.
Yep.
Someone
Happy to
speaking
debate.
for the motion.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And in doing so, I'd like to acknowledge the two submitters, and particularly Sian, for presenting her case today. We've had quite a conversation around the room today, and I think the highlight for me is the fact that the planning team have actually taken a due diligence approach to formulating a recommendation together with the various conditions by which we should have comfort from an elected representative group, but also residents nearby, that they have there is recourse for the owners of the property if they go outside of those conditions which would not necessarily have been put on the over 200 other Airbnbs that are in code areas. So this has an extra level of scrutiny on it. It's an impact assessable. I'm comfortable with the approach that officers have taken. They've gone right through the issues that have been presented, and others as well that have been raised, and therefore, on balance, I'm comfortable with the approval and the approval with its conditions.
Someone against? Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Chair. It'd be nice if everything was cut and dried, but it's not. And I always go back to the feeling that the person out there in public land, the general public, all they want is a degree of certainty when they live in the burbs, because that's what they think it is. Thank you, Sian, for your address. It was most informative, and I appreciate, from your perspective, you and your husband have made a significant investment there and didn't bank on this type of use right next door. Please don't compare residential use, i.e. The glib explanation of students living in houses associated with the university or for any other such use, because there is a degree of accountability still for a residential use, because they're usually there longer than 3 months and usually would find themselves turfed out for inappropriate behaviour as a renter. What I just heard from Sian, and I'm open to be corrected on this, but was a degree of lack of accountability from short-term stay residents, not appreciating a neighbourhood, a unique use to the street, the frequency of this potential for a lack of feeling or empathy for the neighbourhood or accountability to the neighbourhood, unlike even, dare I stereotype, students, and associated numbers with functions well in excess of 8 people at any one time, albeit for short but very disruptive periods of time, and more frequently than what would occur, a reasonable person would expect, than a residential activity or residential purpose. given its locality, the reason why I raised my initial question, I find it somewhat hard to believe that it'd even be a desirable place for a B&B other than to be used as a company house for short-term stay with that associated problems, those associated problems that I've spoken about. Councillors, I do predict that this could be a growing problem looking down the barrel of a possible investment in national infrastructure where we have working crews looking for accommodation. And dare I say, there might be other opportunists that want to set up short-term accommodation stays in suburbia all over our city. I feel for Sian and her husband, and I don't think it's appropriate. And I reiterate, Mr. GM, please, let's revisit the suitability of and locality of some of these types of activities in our planning scheme review. Therefore, I can't, beyond all the inverted commas, right reasons for planning reasons, I still can't support it. Thanks.
Anyone speaking in favour of the motion? Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in addition to what Councillor Jeff had to say before, there is opportunity for people when there is misbehaviour at your neighbour's place, whether it be an Airbnb or whether it be just a normal residence. If there's a party going on that's causing too much noise, or a barking dog for that matter, there are steps you can take, which includes going to the police when it comes to loud parties. They come pretty quickly. And so there are opportunities to address this, and that sort of behaviour doesn't happen just in this sort of residence. It happens in any sort of residence throughout our not only our city but also our region. People have parties, as they should be able to, but they have to respect their neighbours, and when they don't, the police can be called and that can be rectified. I'm concerned that there's a major focus on students. Students can be young, students can be old, students can be nice country people coming to town that do respect their neighbourhood. They can't just throw them all into one big garbage bag and make them out to be bad people that misbehave and don't respect the community. So I'm a bit concerned about that. In relation to car parking, you can go to most streets in our city and find cars parked all over the street, and most times you can only get down that street single lane. You have to wait for a car to come through to actually keep going. That's quite a common occurrence with the narrow street developments that now occur in our city, and did occur in the olden days as well. So that's quite common for many cars to be parked in streets. Very rare to find a street that isn't, to be honest. And it's usually the really big wide streets that don't have the cars parked on there. The community, it's not just made up of young bad people. There are young good people, there are old bad people. And I think we can't be just giving everyone a label and saying this is the sort of person that's going to be there. I really appreciate Sian sharing her experience in relation to a company hiring the house and putting workers in that made noise, or was it the funeral? The company. I appreciate her sharing that experience, but I have to tell you that could actually happen in any street in suburbia, and that it's happened to Sian. I feel for you that it has occurred, and particularly when you're trying to put children to sleep. But that sort of behaviour can happen in any street, and as a council, we have to, if we want to refuse this, we have to come up with legitimate reasons why we're refusing it that will stand up in court. And quite frankly, I don't believe I've heard anything here today that would stand up in court. So I support this.
Thank you, Councillor Summerfield. I've got Councillor McMahon speaking against.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate that the Airbnb, the short-term accommodation market is growing. And I appreciate that Council gets a lot of these that are done by officer recommendation. But I actually welcome the process that, because this one isn't a cut and mould process and then has submitters against it, it can be brought to us who can look at each case in light of their own facts, as we should be able to. And I don't think that it's a one-size-fits-all with these Airbnb type packages. I I think that we as a council need to do some work on short-term accommodation and the very broad definition that has and what it means and how it means different things to different people. In this particular case, emotions out, the facts are that this is a house in a standard 500 square metre block in suburbia with a very narrow road that's designed, I think, for the single family occupancy that you see in my opinion, every single one of those other houses on the screen before us. And I know there's been some issues with 2 car parks. Well, the very fact is they're all up the road anyway. There's been a lot of talk on 8 people, different parties. Well, I don't think it matters. The fact is that, in my opinion, in light of the facts associated with this case, that house in suburbia may not be the most appropriate for an Airbnb style accommodation. I know that there are many houses in Toowoomba region suitable for Airbnb. I don't believe that's one of them, which is why I welcome each case in light of its own facts scenario that we have here. Sorry, Chair, just as a side note, I thought alternate recommendations were done first. So I'm happy to speak against this one instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Anyone else speaking for the motion? No? That closes the debate. We have a mover, Councillor McDonald, seconder, Councillor Summerfield. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The motion's carried.
And against, thank you.
Against?
Recorded,
Record
thanks.
the vote. Division
Thank
of the
you.
vote.
All right. Yep. Okay.
Love to see someone live in
The meeting, declare the meeting closed at 3:12.
Brilliant. Well done.